We talking rom-com, we talking action, we talking drama and movie classics. Whatever you want, yo, we have it. Cause we talking movies on the podcast. So I married a film critic. So I married a film critic. So I married a film critic. Hey honey, I just want to talk about the movie like casually. You don't have to bring up the cinematography. Honestly, let's just talk about like how the characters were fun. Married a film critic. So I married a film critic.
Welcome to So I Married a Film Critic. I'm your co-host Julia.
And I'm Barry. Hello everyone. Good evening.
And today's conversation is going to be about last year's movie, Last Night in Soho.
Directed by Edgar Wright. This, of course, is the filmmaker who, I remember you and I saw Shaun of the Dead the weekend it opened in the States anyway, and we loved it, and we've been keeping up with, I've certainly been keeping up with most of his movies. The first movie you and I ever saw at an Alamo Draft House was his movie Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, which, of course, is a great film.
I love an Alamo Draft House. I love an Alamo Draft House.
You just went somewhere.
More than I love
You're not
Scott
even thinking
Pilgrim.
about where you are right now. You're just like, oh, the Alamo Draft House.
Like, bring me some food while I sit here watching a movie.
This episode's sponsored by, no, we only wish.
I wish.
We love the Alamo Draft House. But yeah, that was the first movie we ever saw. I remember as we walked in, to really put you in that world that Wright created for that film, they were playing all this video game footage to like immerse you in in the world of Scott Pilgrim.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, so Last Night in Soho was the Hawaii Film Critics Society's best pick for 2021.
And Julie's mentioning this because I'm the founder of the Hawaii Film Critics Society. Very proud of that. It was to my delight and surprise that it won the Best Picture Award, voted by the Hawaii Film Critics. And also, let's see, we also gave it, I say we because I'm not, I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but, I voted. It doesn't mean that the winners reflect all my votes.
All of the critics vote, and
just
then
to be clear,
you tally them up, and
it's
whoever
not me,
right?
but yeah,
I think our listeners understand.
Just to be clear about it, like he's the one who it's not me. It's all of us voting together, and so one Best Picture of 2021. Again, I couldn't have been happier about that choice, as well as Best Editing, Best Sound, which is also highly deserved, and the one that surprised me was Best Horror Film, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, he doesn't think it's a, quote, horror film.
I don't think it's not a horror film, but,
we got in a big discussion about it
one of the reasons is there were some good horror films that came out last year. I'm a big fan of, not to derail the conversation, but a big fan of Nia DaCosta's version of Candyman that came out last year. Big fan of that. And A Quiet Place Part 2 also came out last year. Those films are definitely horror films. I don't think Last Night in Soho is a horror film, and not only that, I would say it's a genre neutral film. I think this movie doesn't have a genre, and I mean that in the most complimentary of terms. I think this is a film that, if you don't know what this film is, what it's about, what you're getting into, it takes you on a ride. It's constantly shifting gears. You certainly got ahead of it, but I do think it's a hard film to get ahead of in terms of story. And in terms of genre, it does change hands a few times.
It kind of reminded me of watching Mulholland Drive when I was like, what is happening? Who are these characters? Why are we doing this? And I would guess something. And now I know when I'm on the right track, because you'll just say, just keep watching. Like, stop trying to guess.
Well, I don't want to yes, you're right. That's exactly who Kaiser Soze is. Like, I don't want to give away, if you figure it out, great. But I don't want to say something that's going to take away from the experience of discovery.
I'm not expecting you to answer my questions. I just want to put it out there.
You're just rhetorically putting it out there. But anyway,
Yeah.
I feel like I need to respond because I'm not going to be the jerk. I'm your husband, so of course I'm not going to ignore you. But at the same time, I'm like, don't just watch it. Don't stop making guesses. And if you make guesses, don't tell me what you're guessing.
But see, then at the end, you're like, wow, you really you caught on to this stuff.
Yeah, there were two big. There was one that was a misdirect that we both fell for, which is cool because that's how the movie was designed in terms of its story. But yeah, there is a big twist that you were right on top of, and I did not note the first time. But to your point, yeah, there's a lot of Mulholland Drive in this. There's a lot of different films, which we'll get into, but I think it's a good comparison.
Okay.
Very complimentary comparison.
So our film opens up in England, and we see Eloise in this beautiful gown, and she's kind of dancing around her room, and we find out that she is really into fashion.
I mean, this is, gosh, I mean, what a ravishingly beautiful way to open up this film. The door opens, and there she is, and the door opens, and we walk into this world with her, and she's dancing around her room. I'd say I love it when movies open like this. I think the last time a movie opened like this and it made me this happy was Elizabeth Shue at the beginning of Adventures in Babysitting. Do you remember the opening of that?
No.
She's dancing all over her room to And Then He Kissed Me.
No.
It's the rest of the film. I
don't think I was allowed to watch that movie.
Have you not seen Adventures in Babysitting? Again, totally derailing this discussion. 1987.
Okay, 87?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was 7. My parents were not letting me see those kinds of movies.
It's not, well, I mean...
Okay, our daughter's 6. Next year you're going to let her see it?
No.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not letting her... No,
exactly.
Okay, good point. But, as we've established, there's been some interesting films that you watched growing up that are kind of,
No, I was not allowed to watch that many interesting things.
But let's face it, a movie called Adventures in Babysitting, it's not like they were making you watch Platoon. It's Adventures in... The word babysitting is in the title. Yeah. It's not the edgiest of films, and it was it's a quasi-Disney movie. It was Touchstone.
Okay, yeah, we are getting derailed, but no, right. I think I've seen it once.
All right, we'll watch it together. It has an anniversary this year, so I'm going to be writing about it. But anyway, the opening of that is Elizabeth Shue dancing all over her bedroom to a song, and it's so charming. It gets the movie on the right foot.
What about the Ryan Gosling, Emma Stone movie, that opening?
Crazy Stupid Love?
No, the musical.
La La Land?
Yeah, that
Where they're dancing in the street?
Yeah, that opening was fun.
Yeah, but I'm doing a bedroom dance comparison.
Oh, a bedroom dance.
Yeah, and the word, so I'd say if we're going to rate these things, the very top would be this film with Thomas and Mackenzie dancing in her room. Second place would be Elizabeth Shue. At the very bottom would be Britney Spears in Crossroads. Do you remember that? Because she's using her bedpost as like a stripper pole, and she's in her underwear, and the movie's like 5 minutes old. I'm going... I shouldn't be watching this. What am I doing? And I took you to see that on a date.
We saw that together.
Yeah, I'm like, hey, want to see the Britney Spears movie? Okay. So yeah, we went and saw it opening day. We did the same for Glitter. You and I are the reason that the American Idol musical from Justin and Kelly, we're the reason that movie grossed like $17.
And we have lost all credibility now.
Well, you see the gold and sometimes you see the tin.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so
we've discussed the first 2 minutes of this film.
Yeah, the first 2 minutes. But her dress, she's in this like ball gown that she created, and it looks like it was made out of material that looks like newspaper writing. Yeah. It's so cool.
She's dancing around posters. I mean, she dances right next to the Breakfast at Tiffany's poster and does the Audrey Hepburn pose. She's clearly someone it's not just that she's dancing because she loves to dance. This is a celebration of a time period that she loves. This is her soul connects to this part of history that is very much in the past. But for her, this is her thing, the way a lot of young people are into the 80s right now.
Totally.
Totes.
Yeah. Okay, so then she sees a reflection of somebody in her mirror. And we find out it's her mom. Yeah. So that's kind of weird. And what's that about?
Well, to be clear, her mother is dead. So it's...
Well, yeah. Okay, her mom's dead.
It's not like she's going, dinner time! No, her mom is dead. So that's why it's creepy.
And I called it. I was like, dead mom? I mean, who else could it be? And then her grandma has the mail, and Ellie gets accepted to fashion school in London, which is a huge deal. And she's so excited. And, she's packing, and her grandma basically says, the London is a scary place. Yes. You need to be careful.
The foreshadowing is it's a lot, but at the same time, the movie at this point has such to just throw a word out, a very plucky, perky sort of tone. you don't know where the film is quite going, and as you shouldn't. This, the less you know about this film, the better. But yeah, the grandma does say, it reminds her that her mother wasn't well mentally. We learned that Eloise's mother committed suicide, and Gran says, you can come back from London if the thoughts become too much. Like, okay, that's troubling.
And she says, like, I just don't want to disappoint you. And the grandma says, you could never do that. So it's very clear that there is a very sordid past with the mom. And so the grandma's doing everything she can to make sure that Ellie feels safe and secure and in a loving environment, because she does not want the same thing to happen to her granddaughter. So you can kind of tell that the love between them and their bond is very strong.
Yeah, definitely. To Gran's point, she's about to go to London, and obviously, if you, and I don't want anybody to, but if you were to remake this and make this a Yankee movie, it would be, about a young woman moving to Hollywood or moving to New York. We get it. You're moving to the big city all by yourself to pursue an education. There's a lot that could go right there. There's a lot that could go wrong there. Yeah, so we get it. We understand what Grant is talking about, but of course, the underlying aspects of Eloise's mental condition, that's also, it doesn't seem like there's anything to worry about.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
Other than the mirror.
She saw her dead mom in a mirror, so that seems a little like there is something to worry about.
Let's face it. There are apparitions in this film and other horror films that are very, unsettling, to put it mildly. In this case, it's like, okay, that doesn't seem too bad.
Yeah. Okay, so she takes off in a cab and gets to London and is trying to find her place. I don't know, there's a creepy cab driver.
Yeah, definitely want to talk about that. The film doesn't waste any time establishing the themes going on here, and one of which is that this is a city of men who are wolves. And the cab driver, he comments on, the character only has a few minutes of screen time, and he's speaking to Eloise through the mirror as he's driving her. He comments on her legs, and he boasts that she may have found her first stalker.
Yeah, like what?
He's joking, ha ha, but at the same time, the warning bells go off for us as much as it does for Eloise. It's a very affecting moment, I find, where she gets out of the cab early. She goes into, I guess, like a convenience store, and she's hiding from him. She looks out the window, and she sees that he's just kind of sitting there. Eventually, he drives away. But we feel it right away. We feel where this movie, we could kind of get a sense of where this film is going. The sense of danger is there. It's strange because, again, like, certainly the music and the tone at this point of Thomas and Mackenzie's performance, it's pleasant. But at the same time, we get the sense of like, okay, there's definitely a sense of danger to this.
Right. So she finally gets to her dorm room, and this is where she meets her obnoxious roommate, Jocasta. And I'm telling you, if this was my roommate in college, I would have turned around and left.
Really? Oh man, I don't know. I've had some winter roommates.
Yeah, you've had way more colorful roommates than I have.
My freshman year, there's a lot of stories I could tell, but yeah, my freshman year I think was the big winter. And I've had roommates I loved. I hope like Jeff isn't hearing this going, what are you talking about? No, I had some roommates I genuinely loved. But yeah, my freshman year I was paired with a guy. There were 4 of us, and it was 2 guys on either corner of the dorm room. And one corner was this guy who it was definitely a revolving door of girlfriends. And he was just a real partier. He just loved to blast his music. Handsome guy, but just ugh.
Is this the one who liked to do naked jumping jacks?
Different guy.
Oh, okay.
Different guy. Yeah, you're jumping to my sophomore year. So
okay.
No, freshman year. So this guy,
too many.
Yeah, he had like really pretty snake eyes. We have a mutual friend who used to date him. Anyway, the end of that story was that I come back to my dorm room one morning after class, and I see that there's a cop car, and they're escorting him into the cop car. And as he's going into the cop car, he's doing the perp walk, and he's going, A-E-I-O-U.
He was flying high.
Well, I went inside and asked my roommate, who's still my dear friend to this day, and I won't drop his name because I'm sure he doesn't want to be a part of this, but what the heck? Jeremy. So I asked Jeremy, like, what happened? And he said, well, what happened is he dropped a bunch of mushrooms. He was watching Alice in Wonderland. And I told on him, and the cops have come and taken him away. And that was the last time I ever saw him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But he was really singing that Alice in Wonderland song.
Okay. Well, Jocasta wasn't just getting high and going into her own little world. I mean, she just right away is asking Ellie all these questions, and she is just like one-upping her every chance she can get. And she finally says, what about your mom? And Ellie says, oh, my mom's dead. And she's like, oh, finally something that we can connect on. My mom's dead too. And it's like, wow, okay. And then later on, when they're talking to a bunch of other girls, they ask about her mom again. And she says, oh, well, she killed herself. And she said, yeah, I was 7. And oh my gosh, Jocasta was like, well, I was 15, but I had an uncle who killed himself, too. So, it's just like every time Ellie says anything, Jocasta is just one-upping her.
Yeah, she's all kinds of awful. She is just terrible. And clearly Eloise's naivete and innocence and sweetness and earnestness is a complete contrast to Jocasta's cynicism and insecurity. That's probably the worst thing, that she's so insecure and awful and doing lines of coke and drinking all night. And yeah, because
Ellie shows up in an outfit that she made to fashion school, which makes sense. And Jocasta is wearing like the latest, fashion icon outfit, and is just like making fun of her to her other friends. Like, oh, I can't believe, gosh, the nerve to come in an outfit that you made. Oh, So when they go out that night with everybody, I mean, Ellie just ends up leaving the group early because she's like, get me out of here.
Yeah.
And I mean, so she goes to bed, and then Jocasta comes home with a guy, and to just start, it's like, have some respect. So Ellie goes out and sleeps in the like common area, but there's all these people partying there too. So this poor girl. But this is where she meets John this first night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So John kind of shows some interest. Oh, she actually meets him outside of their dorm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he offers to help her with her bag, but she says no. She just had that creepy exchange with the cab driver. And then she sees him at the bar. She sees him at the dorm party. And he's just very nice and kind to her and just really wants to get to know her. But obviously she's like, not really.
And because it's this movie, I'm immediately suspicious of this character. I'm suspicious of all the male characters in this movie because it's established right off the bat. There are a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing throughout this film. And
so you don't blame her for just being like, I'm just not going to give you the time of day.
Although to be clear about it, and one of the things I do love about this movie, this portion of the film that we're talking about, Eloise's situation is, we certainly have empathy towards what she's going on. It's kind of heartbreaking to see that outside of school, this is really a bummer situation, but like it feels like a light comedy.
Right.
It is amusing, the whole thing, the nonsense of her having to write her name on a soda can. And there's all sorts of like little details that even though Jocasta is terrible and the situation is impossible, and we're establishing immediately that this character is losing lots of valuable sleep, but the movie doesn't give you any indication of where it's going, which is, I think, wonderful.
No, I mean, I am just blindsided at every turn with this movie. So eventually Ellie sees an ad for a room in somebody's house, and she's like, I'm going to go check this out. So this is where she meets Mrs. Collins.
Played by Diana Rigg, the late Diana Rigg. To my shame, I didn't recognize her. Diana Rigg was Mrs. Peel in the original The Avengers TV show, and she was also a Bond girl. She was in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is my favorite James Bond film, and I did not recognize her at all in this film. And every scene, she's wonderful in this.
Miss Collins?
Yes?
It's Ellie. We spoke on the phone.
Oh, yes. Room is on the top floor. Have a few rules. Don't take smokers.
I don't smoke.
No male visitors after 8 o'clock.
Not a problem.
And no using the laundry room at night. It rattles right through to mine.
I don't do laundry.
Aye.
I mean, I don't do nighttime laundry. I do laundry. I'm very clean.
Good. It's a bit old-fashioned for some, but I won't do nothing to it. If you don't like it, you can find somewhere else.
It's perfect. I love it.
So she has a home and she says, you know, you can have this upstairs room and these are the rules. No guys past 8. And Eloise is like, no problem. And she says, oh, by the way, you know, there's a restaurant next door. So I hope you like the smell of garlic. It's very strong. But the room has a very old-timey feel.
Yeah.
It's kind of vintage decorated, and Eloise is just like loving it. She's like, I get this whole space to myself. I don't have to deal with a terrible roommate. I mean, she's like, I want to take it. I'll take it right now. And she says, okay, she makes her pay, I mean, basically 4 months of rent up front. Mm-hmm. And she says something I thought was curious. She said, I hope that's not too much, but I've just had girls leave in the middle of the night. Yeah. And I'm like, well, that's weird. How many girls have stayed there and how many of them have just up and left? Yeah. In the middle of the night?
That didn't trigger any warning bells for me. I mean, that's also like just the etiquette of people I know like have just like left their jobs in the middle of a shift, So I don't know that.
Okay, but
certainly when you're college age too, it's like, whatever, I'm going to do something else. And they just run.
Well, okay, maybe, but to have somebody pay 4 months rent up front, that was like, oh, that's a lot of money. And there's a reason why.
We'll.
So anyways.
We'll dance around that. But
that was a warning for me right at the top.
Yeah. So Eloise, this whole portion, I mean, if anything watching, I'm like, man, this really tapped into my fears and insecurities when I was in college. Missed classes, nightmare roommates, and the situation of living quarters. Because if you're in an uncomfortable situation, it makes, for a very long 4 months. And when I was in college, I mean, certainly when I went for my BA, I was always living on campus. And I did have those semesters where it was just a nightmare roommate for 4 or 5 months at a time. So, yeah, this part of the film, even though I haven't been a college freshman in a long time, but it for me, like, oh man, I feel this so much. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I never had as terrible of a roommate. Like, your roommate stories are insane. I've just had more like annoying roommates. And then...
Well, you and I went to the same college.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. We went to the same college, and do remember that where I lived on the campus, the dorm rooms that I lived in at the time were referred to as the ghetto. And you, on the other hand, lived in the second or third floor of this new building that they built, which was a palace. Compared to where I was, where in the wintertime...
That doesn't change, like, the student population.
In the wintertime, where I was, my dorm room, when it would snow and the wind was really, really strong, my room would whistle because the wind was so freaking cold. I'd be laying there like, I want to go over to Julia's house because it's so nice over there.
Yeah, it was nice. I did get to stay in these dorms when they were brand new.
Yeah, you were like living in a palace, and for me it was like being in a tent outside. It wasn't all that different. I could see my breath in the middle of the night. College. Anyway.
College. Okay, so now we do get to see Ellie in class, and they're supposed to be, designing fashion things. But, okay, then now that she's at Mrs. Collins's house, is this the second act?
Yeah.
Where one night she goes to bed, and I thought this was a cool scene where the covers go over her head.
And we're in a new world.
And the camera pulls back.
An impossible pullback. Where it's like we're in a world of covers.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's great. She becomes really small, mm-hmm. and it's like this bed is huge. Yeah. And that's when okay, we're going somewhere else. I don't know where we're going. So then you see Ellie in her pajamas in 1960s London?
Yes.
Okay, so she goes to this fancy club. And then all of a sudden, it was weird. This is where we are introduced to Sandy.
Played by Anya Taylor-Joy.
Mm-hmm. And at first I thought Sandy was like maybe like her, like an alter ego kind of thing.
Sure.
But I quickly kind of realized that wasn't the case. But you see Sandy in this like really beautiful pink dress, and she's going down these stairs, and she's trying to introduce herself to the owner of the club. She wants to be a singer. She can dance. And then you see Ellie is always her reflection in the mirror. So this is, I don't know, Ellie kind of watching this happen.
Yeah, Ellie she's literally shadowing her, but instead of being a shadow, she's a reflection. So you can always see Eloise being next to Sandy through different reflective surfaces. There's a nice bit of foreshadowing because Ellie is carrying around this photograph of her mother and her gran, and it's a nice precursor because it's basically two women encased in glass in that photo. And in this case, glass is the thing that separates Ellie from this world. She can't really, the film does kind of play fast and loose with it. But for the most part, Ellie is not able to physically partake in this world. She's just kind of a tourist. She's basically just watching it.
It's a looking glass.
Yeah, it's very Alice in Wonderland. Although at times, again, like as it progresses, she's able to do a little bit more than just watch. In times that she is like, literally embodying the space that Sandy is in, or she's able to say things and whatnot.
Yeah, it gets progressively more. I don't know, like you said, she just takes up more space.
It becomes more of a tangible experience and not just the visual and audio experience of being in this world. Yeah.
So this is where Sandy meets Jack, and
played by Matt Smith, one of the doctors of Doctor Who.
And so she's like flirting with him, and he's flirting with her, and she says she wants to be like the singer that was just on stage. And he said, well, she started at the bottom. Like, are you willing to climb the ladder?
Yeah.
And she's kind of like, I don't need to do that. Like, I'm good enough to be up there right now.
Well, hello there.
The bartender said I should get to know the handsome fella standing next to Cilla Black.
You should. And you are?
The next, Cilla Black.
Are you now? Well, she started out as a coach girl.
You willing to work your way up?
Of course.
What can I get you to drink?
It's Sandy, and I'd love a Vespa.
James, we'd love a Vespa. So what do you do, Sandy?
Well, I sing, of course.
How's your dancing?
Care for a demonstration?
So he sets up an audition for her at a different club, and she sings for this other guy, and he says, great, you can sing, like, you're hired. And so then Sandy says, well, I need someone to manage me, and Jack agrees. So this whole thing is like, it's like, going to Hollywood and getting your first job, getting a manager, you're super excited. There's that innocent, like, oh, I'm going to make it kind of thing. And yeah, when Ellie wakes up in the morning, it's like she's been in this world all night.
Yeah. Like,
I don't know. Is she just exhausted every morning?
I suspect so. And I think that's one of the things as her mental state starts to degrade over the course of the story. I think the fact that she's not sleeping, that when she goes to sleep, whether it's dreaming or whether it's some kind of time travel, she is in this world mentally. So I think when she wakes up, she's probably just exhausted to be in the so-called real world.
Yeah. Like every morning when her alarm goes off, she's just like, oh, and even John asks her out and she says, oh, I have plans. And she cannot wait to go back to bed to go back into Sandy's world.
Yeah.
So we kind of quickly see that Sandy's new gig at this club is a little bit shady, to put it mildly. And the first time she's on stage, this other woman is like doing a marionette number, and all the girls, it's a little
it's like a
burlesque.
A can chorus number. Yeah.
Yeah. And
she's a chorus girl.
Yeah. And you're just watching Ellie this is where Ellie kind of becomes an audience member, and she's sitting with just a sea of men, And she's kind of watching like, wait, this isn't what Sandy wanted to do. You know, she's just really kind of disgusted at what she's seeing and hearing. She goes backstage and she sees all of the girls basically
debasing themselves sexually.
Yeah, and just
prostituting themselves, compromising themselves, however you want to put it. It's incredibly sad, and it's one after another, and it's very expressionistic. And you could say like, well, there's a dreamlike nature to it, so perhaps it's not literally happening the way it's presented, but it's about the idea of how it makes you feel, and it's this sense of just the overwhelming sadness of all these young women who are probably exactly in the situation that Sandy had been in, and this is where they've ended up, and this is where Sandy is going.
Mm-hmm. So we see Sandy. I think the montage that was just really heartbreaking was her. Jack's like, get out on the dance floor, so she's out there dancing to these 60s songs, and then a man would come up to her. They would sit down, say, "Oh, what's your name?" And she'd tell them a name. "Oh, that's a lovely name." Hand her a drink. She starts drinking. Eventually, it's going to lead to sex. So it just keeps happening over and over and over again. And it's just, every time she goes back on the dance floor, the dancing gets more frantic. And every time she gets another drink, she's just more drunk and out of control. And then there's another man who says, he's like, "Well, what's your name?" And she gives him a name. And he said, "No, what's your real name?" And she says, "Sandy." And he's like, "You're too good for this. Like, what are you doing?" And she's like, "No, I'm not. I'm not too good for this." And he's like, "You need to get out while you can." And he's the only one out of this just parade of guys who doesn't take advantage of her.
Yeah. Yeah, this parade of men who are lecherous monsters, all of them.
Yeah.
And something I wrote in my notes, I mean, it's like, it's not just the men, it's London. This movie is depicting London and the men of London drowning the idealism and the hopes of these women.
Mm-hmm. So then we go back to Ellie's world, and she has dyed her hair blonde. She starts looking more and more like Sandy. She buys a 375-pound coat. Okay, it's not in weight. It was pounds, so money.
This part freaked you out. All the stuff that's happening, nothing. Like, oh my God, how much?
I was like, she just spent 375 pounds on that coat.
This is the moment where you're like, I can't believe that.
Well, this is before it gets like really, really bad.
Yeah.
But so her and Sandy are now wearing the same coat, have the same hair. She's seeing the places from these dreams in real life.
Yeah, so they don't specifically tell you that it's 2021, but clearly, I mean, it's contemporary. All the scenes with Eloise are contemporary versus the scenes in the 60s, which are so elaborately, beautiful recreation. And I'm not old enough to remember this, so I have no sense of it. This is it's a film that takes you to another world. The specificity of the art direction, the cars, everything about it, and of course the music. It has a real feel for a lost time, a lost era. Although as the film progresses, you get a sense like, well, it's not the worst thing in the world. That this is a time that's come and gone.
Yeah. So Ellie, in her class, her project is making that dress that you first meet Sandy in. And she even draws, her sketch is Sandy's face and hair and everything. And her teacher says, "Is that who you're drawing that for? Is that who you're making this dress for?" And she's like, "Yeah, whenever I picture this dress, this is who is wearing it." And her teacher's just like, "Did you hear that, class? Like, that's so great." And of course, Jacosta's just like rolling her eyes still.
Jacosta is terrible. We hate Jacosta.
Yeah. So, but you can kind of see that her nighttime adventures are definitely affecting her day to day.
They're starting to blend into each other, and she's starting to hallucinate. Sometimes it's a little thing, and sometimes it's a big thing. She's seeing figures that are not there. So, yeah, if anything, I do get a sense that it's this this dire lack of sleep that's doing this, as well as and indicated that perhaps some of her family history is manifesting itself. Yep.
After she spends 375 pounds, she decides she needs to get a job. Shocker, because she has now spent 4 months of rent in one day, and this coat.
You're totally keeping track of her finances. You would have been a good friend for her.
She needs to make some money. So she goes to this bar where she had been before with her friends, and she had also seen John. Seen John there. Now there is a curious character who always hangs out at this bar.
Played by Terrence Stamp.
Yeah, and he is kind of creepy. I mean, we don't know what his deal is.
That's just Terrence Stamp's resting face. I mean, let's face it. I love Terrence Stamp, but
he's got creepy resting face. Is that a thing?
If anyone could be handsome and terrifying at the same time, it's Terrence Stamp.
Yeah. So she works at this bar, and he just, I don't know. The thing I wondered right away was, is that Jack?
Yeah, and I think we're meant to. That is the misdirect we're supposed to.
Yeah,
fall
that's
for.
the misdirection.
Yeah.
So you're thinking, oh my gosh, she's seeing these visions at night, and there's this horrible, basically a pimp trafficking Sandy and who knows how many other women. And now he's just living out his life as an old man in London and going to this bar, and he doesn't have to pay for his crimes. I mean, that's kind of where my thought process went.
Of course.
Yeah. So then the crazy part.
Well. One of many.
Yeah, but now Ellie and John go out together. Date.
Yeah, and this date, it's a key sequence, and this is pretty much where all the darkness of the story really shows its hand. They go to a costume party. It's Halloween night. Jocasta, again, worst person in the universe. She hands Eloise a drink, and Eloise.
And I had a feeling, I'm like, oh, she roofied her.
Like, don't drink it.
Yeah,
especially if Jocasta gives it to you.
Yeah,
but of course she just gulps it down because I get it, social peer pressure, but
no,
this is the lesson of
we
peer
know
pressure.
This, ladies. We know this. You always get your own drink and you guard it with your life.
And it has this like weird candy eyeball in it too. I know it's Halloween, but still, I thought like don't drink something with like candy eyeball in it.
That's the thing that bothered you.
I'm thinking like don't drink it because she gave it to you, and don't drink it because it has this little eye like looking at you while you're like, don't do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, but of course, Eloise is like,
this is the drink that should have just gone into the plant. She should have been like, oh, thank you, and thrown it into the plant in the corner of the room.
I mean, it couldn't be more obvious if Jocasta had like poured like a little jar with a skull and crossbones on it into the drink. It's
So then now she's dancing frantically on the dance floor, and John's out there with her, and she starts seeing these kind of men, ghost creatures.
So she starts hallucinating quite violently, and you get a sense, well, clearly Jocasta gave her the mother of all Mickeys, so she leaves the club.
Is this the first time she's seen the men like that? I don't think it is.
No, I think there's some more foreshadowing. I'm not remembering what it is, but I'm pretty sure there's some other little bits of foreshadowing. But in any case, she and John leave the party, and before they do, they kiss. So it's a sense of like, oh, okay, something's going to happen here. Even though Eloise's moral center is certainly intact. She's like, I can't have a man in this apartment. I've made that very clear.
But she takes him back. She says, just be quiet, Mrs. Collins.
And John's like, challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted. Yeah, so they are up in her room, starting to make out. And so she's on her back and she's looking up at the ceiling. And she, just imagine a mirror up there. And what you're seeing is not yourself.
Yeah.
You're seeing Sandy.
And to be clear, like this mirror does not exist.
It doesn't exist,
no. She's seeing this mirror.
Yeah.
Because it's definitely not that kind of room.
No, there's not a real mirror on the ceiling. But she sees in the mirror Sandy and Jack, and they're in this room, and they're making out, going to have sex, and then Jack violently starts stabbing Sandy.
Yeah, it becomes a murder scene.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so Ellie is freaking out, and she starts yelling. Of course, Mrs. Collins wakes up. She's on the other side of the door pounding, and she's like, "Who's in there? I'm going to kill you. Get out." And poor John. He thinks he's a goner.
Worst Halloween ever.
Yeah, worst Halloween ever. So he runs out, and when the scene ends, I mean, Ellie's just left cowering in the corner.
Yeah, and as Mrs. Collins comes in the room, turns on the light, and the hallucination vanishes immediately.
Yeah. So it's really... So, okay, at this point, I'm thinking, oh, well, obviously, Sandy is a real person, and she was murdered in this bedroom.
Yeah.
By Jack, who now drinks at this bar where Ellie works. And now we're dealing with a murder mystery.
Yeah, and that's exactly where Wright wants you to think it's going. Yeah.
So we're dealing with a murder mystery. And even Ellie goes to the cops and she says, "I saw a murder. It happened in the 60s. And the cops are like, "Okay, tell me more. Do you, were you drugged?" And at that moment, she just like flashes back to the drink Jocasta gave her. And she's like, damn it.
It's a very well acted scene. I've never liked these kinds of scenes. I think the only scene I like more is the scene in Ghost. Remember where Demi Moore is telling Stephen Root, she's like, she's talking about Oda Mae. You remember that? Where Demi Moore, she's like, it was real. You don't know. And Stephen Root, as of all people, Stephen Root, he's telling her, like this kind of thing happens all the time. She's got a record. She's got a file.
Oh yeah, he shows her thick file of all the things.
These scenes are almost kind of obligatory, where a character has to prove her sanity to a cop, and the cop is like, "Wow, you're crazy." I really like I like the scene in Ghost, and I like the scene in this one too. I think there's a real sensitivity to the way they played and the way it's handled, and it turns out surprisingly that this is an important scene, because initially it feels like a throwaway, like, well, who cares if the authorities believe her or not? No, it ends up mattering very much in the third act. It ends up
mattering, yeah. But and they even say, like, is there a history of mental illness in your family? And she lies and says no, and she's like, but I know who the killer is. Like, I know where he is. He's always at this bar, and so they're kind of like, yeah, okay, we'll look into it, lady. And the female cop kind of tells her, hey, like, if you need help, we can get you help. And Ellie's just like, no, you guys aren't going to believe me, so I'm out of here. Then she goes to the library. This is where she wants to, like, find out who Sandy is. Because, they say, well, what's Sandy's last name?
Well, I think it's not that we have to do it, everything has to be scene for scene and discussed in the film. But I think what are the important details, in addition to, as you've said, the hallucination where she sees that Sandy was murdered by her pimp, but it's also the men, the ghost figures, are these figures who are representative of all the men who took advantage of Sandy in her life sexually. The men who gave her drinks and essentially raped her later on. I think that's one of the most important details, because that's what the library scene ends up being about. How these men are manifesting themselves. Sandy is looking. She's doing what I love. She's going through microfiche. If anything makes me nostalgic. No,
Ellie's doing that.
Ellie's doing it right. She's going through microfiche. I'm like, oh man, if only I could go back to 2002 and lose myself in microfiche. I love microfiche.
I know, and John tries to help her, but there are hundreds of these things?
Yeah, she's looking for every young woman who was murdered in London from 1960 to 1969.
Yeah.
And when John catches up with her, she's in 1965. Like, oh, okay, she really has been there all day.
Yeah, but once these hallucinations start in the library, I mean, she's just running, and she takes scissors and almost murders Jocasta.
Yeah, it's the only missed opportunity of this film. It's like, just get rid of this character.
Yeah, so she runs off. And then this was crazy, because she does keep seeing murdered Sandy, in her real life. She sees her in class, So she's seeing Sandy walk down the streets of London, and she's trying to get to her. And she's running, and all these ghost guys with their creepy, nondescript faces are running after Ellie. and Sandy, I guess.
Yeah.
And at one point they like trap her.
Yeah.
So it's really freaky. So you're like, what is going on? But she does escape, and let's see, where did we go after
From there?
that?
I mean, I think it's right to her going to the bar and having that encounter with
with
Terrence Stamp.
Okay,
Yeah.
so she goes back to the bar, and they're like, "Where have you been?"
Apparently, worst employee ever.
Yeah, worst.
Just vanishes at a time.
She doesn't know what day it is, you guys. So she doesn't even know. She's not sleeping. So she goes down to the bar, and there's the guy, and she starts to record their conversation on her phone because she's gonna get the evidence.
Yeah, she's gonna follow up with the cops and have
Yeah.
proof that this guy murdered someone back in the 1960s. Exactly.
So she starts talking, and she says, "Did you know you knew Sandy?" And he's like, "Oh, Sandy, yeah." Basically, Alex was her undoing, and Alexandra was her real name. So you're thinking, okay, like what does that even mean? And you find out that Terrence Stamp's character was the cop.
Yeah, not Matt Smith, not the pimp / boyfriend.
Jack.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, he was the one who sat there at that table and said, "You don't have to do this. Like, you're better than this. Like, you can get out." And she wouldn't listen to him.
He was one of the few figures in Sandy's life who really tried to, in his way, get her out of there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, because he tells Ellie, like, "I knew all the girls."
Right.
Like, he was basically undercover. Maybe he was undercover.
Whatever he was,
know.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and the way the character is written, the way Stamp is playing him, you get a sense that this guy he's a man of mystery, and he wants to evoke the sense that he's a ladies' man, but he's really more of this sad observer, who by his own definition, I mean, maybe he's at the bar because he was never able to do enough.
Yeah, maybe that's why. Because she's yelling at him like, "You're a murderer. You killed Sandy," and he tells her, "No, I tried to save her," and then he gets hit by a car.
Yeah, it's pretty awful, and yeah. So
this is the only part that I thought, why? This felt like, in movies when they're like, okay, we just need to get rid of this character, and boom, they're gone. Like, why did he have to get hit by a car? Why did he have to die?
Well, I mean, this movie's a tragedy, for one thing, and that's not a criticism. I'm talking about the story. The story is very tragic, and I think it fits. I do. I don't think the character should live to the end, just as there are characters that don't live to the end of the film, and I think it's justified. We're dealing with characters who are suffering because of the mistakes of their past, because of the sins of the past that they're partaking in, and also the things that they witnessed. And I think, in a sense, Terrence Stamp's character is being put out of his misery, in a sense.
Interesting. All right. So
yeah, we get to the big...
She tells John, "I gotta get back home. I mean, I need to
get out of London.
Can you get me can you drive me, or can you get me to the tube?" And he's like, "I can just drive you home." And she's like, "You have a car?" And the joke is that he moved from North London to South London. And he's like, "Well, how am I supposed to get from North London to South London?" So anyways, it's very easy on the tube there. Anyways, that's just a funny thing. If you know anything about London, it's funny.
And it's also, this movie doesn't have a lot of one-liners. It's not a dark comedy. It's not a horror comedy. It's a thriller.
It's like the only thing I laughed at.
Yeah. So any bit of levity that Edgar Wright is able to inject in there, we'll take it.
Yeah. So they get back to Mrs. Collins' house, and he said, "Should I come with you?" And she said, "You better not, but if I'm not back in 15 minutes, come get me." So she goes in to see Mrs. Collins. She's going to try to get back some of her deposit, which, oh my gosh, yes, there's no way she's been there for 4 months. So she knocks on the door, and Miss Collins says, Are you by yourself?" And she's like, "Yeah." She's like, "Come in." And she says, I need to let you know, I'm so sorry to do this to you. I'm not this person, but I have to leave. I have to go back home. So Miss Collins is like, "Come in, have some tea." And I don't know, babe, the way that she handed Ellie her tea, I had a flashback of the movie Get Out. And I was like, oh my gosh, no, it's poisonous. Mrs. Collins is bad. I don't know how, but this is all wrong.
It's all about that tea, huh?
The tea was a dead giveaway. And I know it's London and everyone drinks tea there.
Everybody drinks tea.
But that was the kicker for me.
Interesting.
So then she says, oh, there's a letter for you in that pile. It got mixed up. Sorry, I didn't give it to you. And so she's going through the mail and you see her name is Alexandra.
Dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Which is something you called very early into the film.
I did. You guys, This was the question. I said, is Sandy Mrs. Collins? Like, is Mrs. Collins Sandy?
And I think you asked that immediately after Diana Rigg's first scene. I'm like, how the heck did you... Just keep watching. Don't ask any more questions.
Because in my mind, there has to be a connection, right? Like, like you can't just like introduce random characters without
But in my defense, I'm like, it's a side character. This character's just there for exposition. It's the old woman who it's Shelley Winters in The Tenant. This character is not going to be one of the... No, and it is. It absolutely was. So no, I even said to you, like, man, you're really getting ahead of this movie, Joel. Just watch. Stop asking questions.
He hates it when I ask questions. Okay. I don't need them answered. I just need to say them out loud. Okay.
These rhetorical questions.
Yeah.
No. And again, I want to give you credit because, like, I saw this movie the weekend it came out, and then, you and I just watched it. I mean, it's been months since it came out in theaters, and just watched it the other night with you. And I was fooled the second time. I knew what was coming with Miss Collins, but a lot of the other twists.
You were fooled a second time?
Not with Miss Collins, but certainly with the Terrence Stamp character.
How were you fooled if you
I'd forgotten.
Oh,
I'd forgotten.
Okay.
Jules, so the life of a film critic at the end of the year is you see about, so at the end of the year, 100,
here we go.
120 movies. 120 movies that were eligible for Oscar consideration, whatever. And out of those movies, I made a list of 120 films that came out in 2021 that I'm trying to see. A lot of them hadn't come out yet, or, I managed to get a screener of or whatever, saw it in the theater. I managed to see 60 of these films. So I saw 60 movies between November and the beginning of January. I love this film, but,
it's like a movie a day.
It was like 3 or 4 movies a day, as you remember. I was staying up late at night, and some of these films really stayed with me, and I loved them. And some of these, I'm like, wow, I can't believe I made time to see that. But this was one I couldn't wait to get back to. But no, the specifics of the narrative, some of them really did escape me. And if anything, watching it a second time, the sinister implications of her character really sink in quite quickly.
All right, so Ellie is realizing, oh my gosh, this is Sandy. And so Mrs. Collins says, did you go to the cops about me? Because she said, because she had asked, Ellie had asked Mrs. Collins early on if there was a murder in that room. And Mrs. Collins said, there's been murders in every room in London.
Yeah, it's a fantastic line. And there's a line that a bartender says earlier, and I love it because Ellie makes kind of a comment about, whether the bar that she's working at is a downstairs bar, whether it's haunted. And the bartender says, if this place is haunted by anything, it's the good times. I love this sense of it because it's talking about the practicality of it, that every place has ghosts. Every place that has a sense of history that's been standing for a long time. Of course, somebody died there. Of course, bad things have happened. Every place is haunted by something, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So that was also, you said, oh, she's right. Like, every room in London probably did have a murder.
Yep.
And I said, no, that's what you say when you don't want to answer a direct question.
But I'm thinking like, oh man, that's like a Jack the Ripper reference right there.
Well, yeah, it could be. But also, she doesn't want to answer the question. She doesn't want to say, actually, yeah, there was a murder in this room. There was a young woman named Sandy.
Yes.
So, because what Eloise is finding out is, my vision was wrong. It wasn't Sandy that was murdered. Sandy is the murderer. And
not just the murderer. It's really something, because it's not just that she it's it's not what we thought, which is that she was murdered by Jack. She murdered Jack, and then she proceeded to murder every person that Jack ever forced on her. Every awful, lecherous scumbag man that ever came into her room to pimp her out. She murdered every single one of them.
And hid them in the walls and the floorboards. I mean, there are just rotting bones.
It's great. So it goes back
in this
to
whole entire
the opening
house.
line about the smell of garlic. It's either that Miss Collins is so lucky that an Italian restaurant is downstairs, or that there is some kind of permeating scent, some aroma that she can't quite get rid of, and it smells kind of like garlic.
Ooh.
But whatever it is, like that detail, like that's the one that goes flying back. Like, oh man, this like wall to wall with corpses in this house. And you know, the obviously the important thing, I guess, to say, certainly my point, was that the first time I saw it, and certainly even watching it last night, I'm hearing this story, I'm hearing her tell this story, and I'm watching Diana Rigg tell this story with her beautiful expressive eyes and this character. I found myself completely sympathetic to this character.
100%.
I'm strangely not judgmental to what she had done.
Well, because she says, I died.
She's a victim.
She's like, no, I did die.
She is a survivor and a victim. And I absolutely.
And then she became a prisoner in her own house because, you know, she didn't want to leave or sell it for fear of all these bodies being found.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's someone who's defeated by her, you know, her optimism, defeated by the dream that she had, the shattered dream. And now she's stuck in this house. You know, it is both her escape. There's something just about her being able to survive all these things, but at the same time, she cannot leave this house. Mm-hmm. And we realize that certainly the conversation that Eloise has with Terrence Stamp's character, that has a different meaning when you think back to what he's saying about, you know, who the killer is, and you know, things. It's interesting because you get the sense of like Sandy is basically untouchable in a sense, because on the one hand, she's obviously the person who made all these men disappear, but apparently they couldn't prove it.
No, they couldn't prove it. They would just have. She's like, oh, they would just put missing persons in the paper.
So to go back to the line that you referenced, do you think that perhaps there were other women, young women, college students, whatever, who stayed in that room and had the visions, and instead of dealing with it or engaging with it the way Eloise did, they ran screaming in the middle of the night?
Okay, let's talk about that question after, because I want to finish.
Oh yeah, let's talk about so the climax.
Get to the end.
Let's talk about the climax. Yeah,
because Ellie says, "I'm not going to tell anybody what you did."
Yeah,
and Mrs. Collins is like, "I know you're not." And then the tea. I called it poison tea. And so she's like, "Just lay your head back. You know, just go to sleep. It'll be fine." It's so creepy. And then John knocks on the door.
Because in the earlier scene, she said, if anything, if I don't come out in 15 minutes, check out what
Mrs. Collins is like, "You're a liar. You said you were by yourself." And then you see her total crazy temper come out. And then there's just like fights and people cutting each other with knives. And
it's pretty wild because
a fire gets started.
A fire starts, and while the fire begins to engulf the apartment, John has been stabbed, and Eloise is running up the stairs, drugged, but she's somewhat conscious. And as she's being chased
up to her old room.
She's being chased to her old, but Miss Collins has changed into the young Sandy, or at least that's the way that Eloise is seeing her. And it's pretty wild. It's like this staircase that's seemingly suspended into the heavens, and there's flames and bits of gristle flying through the air, and she's chasing her with this giant knife.
Right.
Yeah.
So they go up to the room, and all of the creepy men corpses, ghosts are like, "Help us," you know. And for a second, I thought, oh my gosh, is this movie trying to make me feel bad for these guys? Because they want, you know, justice for their murders. They want retribution. And for a second, I was like, "What?"
Yeah, that's kind of wrong-headed movie.
Yeah,
because it's the movie kind of pauses for a second to actually give us a chance to actually look directly into the faces of these specters, because they're, on one hand, it's, as you said, like they're very indistinct. You can't quite, they're ghosts. They each have different faces, but you can't quite see what they are. But you do get the sense like, okay, they each have slashed cheeks. They're all murder victims.
Yeah, they're murder victims. So it shows where they were murdered. But I don't know if this is when Ellie sees in a vision like what happened and how they were all killed. But her and Sandy embrace at some point, don't they?
Yeah, because it's, again, like it's Eloise is seeing the whole story, and in a sense, it is this moment of going, oh, okay, this is why these ghostly men have been following me, because they're like, please help us get out of this situation. Please kill her. Please stop her. We were unable to.
Are they in purgatory or something?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think that's probably the status of most ghosts, the ones I've spoken to anyway. So in any case, yeah, they embrace, and I found I was very moved by that moment, because Eloise has been obsessed with this character that has literally been totally out of reach, and suddenly here she is with her, and it's this tragic haunted version of her former self, even more so.
Yeah, and Ellie's like, come with me, like save yourself. Yeah. And Mrs. Collins at that point is her old self, and she says like, no, this is it for me. Like I made my choices, and now this is the end. I can't ever leave this house.
Yeah.
I don't know if she physically can't leave. We never see her anywhere else but the house, but she obviously feels like, this is my prison. I have to pay for whatever I did. I'm not going to go anywhere.
Yeah. So we get two shots. One of Miss Collins sitting in a chair facing the fire as the flames are about to engulf her. And there's also another shot where it's Anya Taylor-Joy as Sandy, the younger version, doing the same. And it's overwhelmingly sad, I found.
Oh, yeah.
It's quite devastating. Yeah. It's something else, because she's a serial killer, but this is a purgatory. I mean, for one thing, she's been in a physical form of this purgatory her whole life, and now she's about to have a spiritual form of it, so to speak.
I mean, she is a murderer, serial killer, but she was also a trafficking victim first.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just tragic all the way around.
Yeah. So it's there's no satisfaction in. I don't, when I think of this movie, I think of Jocasta as the villain. I'm not thinking of Miss Collins as the villain. I'm like, screw Jocasta. Miss Collins, she did what she had to do.
She did what she had to do. So
Jocasta has no excuse. No excuse.
Yeah, so then Ellie gets John out somehow. I mean, somehow they both survive.
It's definitely one of those super duper happy things, because John is still alive. The cops and firemen show up just in time, and there's an interesting thing as we get to the exterior and we see that the apartment is on fire. One of the shots, we look up at the fire, and it's like two windows with flames coming out, and one window below. It almost looks like the face of the men for just a second. I wonder if that's intentional. I don't know, but I wonder, since it is the sense of, the men are going to burn in hell as much as Miss Collins is, at the end of this,
Yeah, they're all getting their burials right now.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're all being cremated.
Yep. All right, so the final scene is, I don't know if this is real or if this is in Ellie's head.
Although there are a lot of scenes in this movie that fall in that category.
Yeah, that make you wonder.
Yeah.
But there's a big fashion show, and Ellie now has her normal hair color back. She's not a blonde anymore. She looks more like herself. And her gran is in the audience, and there's a fashion...
sitting next to John.
Yeah, everyone.
It's a triumph, this show. It's set to a techno version of Petula Clark's Downtown, and the fashion that Ellie has created is a big hit. It's very 60s centric. She goes back. Yes, so it's a huge success. Opening night, her teacher hugs her. I always believed in you. Jocasta sees her, and it's like, good. Jocasta's like sewing. She's not a part of it. She doesn't get to be part of it. Good. I think what if we take it,
but she sees her mom in the mirror.
She does. I think if we can take this scene literally, that it's actually really, really happening. I think the bits with the cop establish that. I think what could possibly be here is that we could assume that after the survival of the fire, Ellie became sort of a local hero. This is the girl who, she had a breakdown in class and she was a promising student. It was because she was living in this house and all over the news that, she managed to escape this fire that was started by this serial killer. I suspect it became like...
Oh, you think everyone found out about all the dead bodies after the fire?
I don't know if they found out exactly about the dead bodies, but I suspect that, it became a sensational story and Ellie, becomes...
Because she survived.
Because she survived. And it becomes like, well, like, let's, I think it's one of these things where had that not happened, I think she'd be known as like, oh, that was that weird girl who dropped out and totally flaked and freaked out. I think because all this happened, I suspect it got it to the news and she becomes,
kind of a local hero. Okay.
I think that would explain the way everyone's treating her at the end of the film, where she is a hero. Even the rotten friends of Jocasta are like high-fiving her and hugging her. Because she is now a person of prominence, and they're acknowledging her talent, but also her celebrity, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Well, so she sees her mom
in the mirror,
and then she sees Sandy in the mirror.
Yeah,
and she walks up to the mirror, and they touch fingers.
Yeah,
and it's like a boop,
and that's it.
And that's it.
Fade to black. Yeah.
So that leaves her mental state. Questionable.
No,
we're not sure about that. She's still seeing things. But to go back to your question, I do think that that the women who stayed in that room had nightmares, dreams, visions of murders.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they saw Sandy being murdered or if they saw her as the murderer, but I definitely think, why else would they all leave in the middle of the night? Like, doesn't make sense. We don't know that that Mrs. Collins was always hosting college students either. It could have been anybody. Could have been any age person, because she saw this ad. I don't know. It wasn't in like a college paper. It was for like anybody.
A note card that was put up on a board.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily trust Mrs. Collins' version of events too. It might be, like you might have heard that some young women disappeared who were here. They just left in the middle of the night.
She's not a reliable.
I gave them some tea and then they went about their way.
Right. She's not a reliable.
The backyard also smells like garlic. The basement smells like garlic. It smells like garlic, but don't just ignore that. You like garlic, right? Okay, good.
Well, but I think there's no way that anybody would stay in that room and not have those dreams. I mean, the floorboards and the walls were lined with corpses.
Yeah, but if you don't know, you don't know. How do I know this house we're in right now isn't lined with corpses and probably rats? Let's face it, there's probably some dead rats, but.
Okay, but Ellie she knew.
I don't know. And that was something you and I really argued about last night.
If this is a horror movie.
No, that we argued about, and I say, no, I don't think it's a horror film. I think it's a psychological thriller, if you will. But again, I think the smart thing to do and the easy thing to do is just say, this is a genre-free movie. It's a movie that, you could see it in 5 different. If there were still video stores, you would see it in 5 different sections because no one's quite sure.
On the screening thing, it said drama, mystery, horror.
Which we talk about 3 very different genres.
Yeah, but it embodied all of them.
I mean, there's certain films that, like Brazil is considered sci-fi. I'm like, no, Brazil is not a science fiction film, but then what else would you call it? I wouldn't call this film a horror film. I think it's more, I
didn't say it was only a horror film.
Okay, but I wouldn't, I don't even like, which is funny because you just mentioned that Hawaii Film Critics Society deemed this the best horror film of 2021.
See, even your colleagues.
Well, that's their opinion. and they're welcome to it, and that's awesome. And we did award the film as such, and there's nothing wrong with calling it that, except that I just feel like there's a lot more going on here. And I do feel like the horror is not, as I've said, I don't think the horror in this movie is supernatural. I think it's psychological.
Yeah. Oh, that was our disagreement.
Yeah.
Because I said, well, I think it's psychological, but I also think that there is a physical element, like a metaphysical element to it, because she's living in a house with corpses.
Yeah.
And I think it's affecting her. And I know you said, of course, she's like going into this dreamlike state and she's not really sleeping, and so that is affecting her during the day, which I get.
Yeah.
I think that these dreams are being like fueled by something.
My case that I made last night, and by the way, it was a heck of an argument. Not a fight, but like a really great argument that we had last night. Went on for some time, which is great. No, I love when movies get us talking like this. My take is that, look, obviously, I think on one hand you should, and obviously you could look at this movie literally, just take everything at face value. It's a ghost story. It's a time travel, like whatever. You want to look at it that way, fine. I want to look at the movie in a secular way because I think that's interesting, because I think the movie allows that interpretation. I think this is a young woman who is traumatized by the loss of her mother. She is dealing with mental illness. She is just obsessed with this fantasy world of what the 60s were like. She wants to live in this world, and going to London is the worst thing that could happen to her. And I feel like she is so immersed and obsessed and possessive about her environment and the people that she sees, who are all connected in some way, that I do feel like when she's dreaming, her unconscious life and her conscious life are all kind of blending together. I think the things that she's seeing are starting to come together. I do feel like you can make an argument that the mystery that she ends up solving and putting together, it's not because of a ghost telling her, it's because that she's just putting the pieces together.
I didn't say a ghost was telling her those things, but I think that there are ghost-like things happening to her.
Right, but this is a supernatural story. But I don't think, I think you could certainly interpret it strictly from her perspective. Because again, this is someone who has a history of mental illness in her family. That's an important detail we learned in the first scene. She's seeing visions of her dead mother in a mirror. Every time she has these dreams, and what they are dreams, she is not sleeping, or her sleep cycle is so erratic that she's waking up exhausted from these all-night dreams, these lucid dreams. So yeah, I do think this is someone who lack of sleep and a lot of mental stimulation, but also mental illness, are having a way with her. And I know it doesn't make it very tidy the way that she it's like, if you look at it that way, then you go, man, it's a real contrivance. It's easier to say like, okay, there's a supernatural element that connects her to everything, but I do feel like because this is taking place in a very, it's not an isolated environment, obviously, but it's an environment where the key figures are all in these particular locations. They're all kind of weaving in and out of each other. She's seeing places that she's dreaming about in contemporary days and 60s. I do feel like the interpretation is there that there are no ghosts in this movie.
Okay. I think you can interpret it that way, but I also think the ghosts that she sees could actually be there. And I think that they are influencing her visions. And I don't think she just like all of the sudden moves into this creepy house and has these visions for no reason. We don't see her having those types of manifestations in any other room that she stays in.
I don't know. It's a tough one for me because it also speaks to how I feel about all this stuff in general. I on the one hand, could ghosts be real? Yes. But at the same time, I do think it's possible to stay at a haunted house and not have any experience at all, and to be completely disconnected to bodies or
well, that's true, because we did stay at the Stanley Hotel. I was unaffected. You saw weird things.
Well, now we have to explain what that's all about. So no, let's just derail it for 5 minutes. So I took Julia to the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado for our honeymoon because it's a historic hotel. It's beautiful. And by the way, Stephen King came up with The Shining when he was there. Stanley Hotel now is like Horror Central. They have the Mile High Horror Festival, yada, yada. But in 2003, when we were there, that stuff was just kind of slowly percolating. But we stayed at the Stanley. They've got a gift shop, or they've got like, the Stanley Hotel, like, shower curtain, some Shining stuff. But really, it was kind of like on the down low at this point. We check into this place, and we find out immediately that it's a historical hotel. So, we were there in July. It's hot as heck.
Oh man, no air conditioning
No air
on our
conditioning.
honeymoon. I was like, why did I not know this?
So it was quite hot. So that gave us reason, like, let's go check out the pool. And it was a really cool pool, real old school pool where it was like, it was a tiled floor. And you're getting ready to go in the pool. And I'm in the hallway, giving you a second. And no joke, two twin girls, both had red hair, both had pigtails, matching bathing suits, holding hands, walking down the hallway together, going to the pool where we were at. And, it's not the same thing as the Grady girls in The Shining, but still, like, I thought, well, that's terrifying. And by the way, not helping matters was that there was a channel at this hotel where everything on this one channel is The Shining in rotation. It was the Kubrick version from 1980, the making of The Shining, and also the 1997 miniseries version, which was filmed there. So I'm like watching The Shining constantly. Whenever we go in the room, it's like, oh, I wonder what Shining we're on now. So I'm like constantly watching The Shining on my honeymoon.
Yeah, so weird. No, the thing I was going to mention is every time, like, you would say, oh, I'm going to go get some ice. I'm like, okay. So you'd come back and you're like, I don't know. It was really creepy out there. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
It definitely, after a while, it started to weigh. I mean, we did take the so-called ghost tour. That was like the only thing they really did at that point. Now there's a lot of stuff, but we took a tour of the building, and they took us to where the equivalent of room 217.
They told us how it used to be like a tuberculosis ward. So
Right.
I mean, a lot of people died here, and now you're probably like, why did you guys go there for your honeymoon? I don't know.
It's beautiful and it's lovely, and Estes Park is fun, and there's all sorts of stuff to do. We went. Remember, we went motorboat, and
it was
a lot
fun.
of cool places. I mean, it's a beautiful, fantastic town.
The Rocky
I love
Mountain
Estes
National Park.
It's great.
Yeah, so
Go.
But it was just really funny because you're like, you don't like think anything's weird, and I'm like, no. What are you talking about? And you're like, I don't know. Like every time you would like be by yourself or like leave the room, I felt like you would have like some kind of like feeling or.
It wasn't like Thomas and Mackenzie and Last Night in Soho, though. I mean,
No,
it wasn't that
I'm not
extreme.
saying
It's
that.
not like you were Miss Collins, and I was like, "There's something wrong with this room." No, I mean, I was like, "That's odd. This is kind of funny," you know.
Yeah.
I mean, in hindsight, I think towards the end, I was like, "Okay, I'm ready to go," because this kind of creeped me out a little bit.
Right. We were only there like 3 or 4 days, I think. But okay, but that answers the question because I think.
Well, I was watching The Shining a lot, and I took the ghost tour, and I was very aware that this iconic hotel inspired Stephen King to write The Shining. So I think, going in there with that mindset,
but I knew all of that too.
Right, but I'm saying that if I had gone to this hotel completely oblivious to all that stuff, and then, a month later, someone's like, Stephen King, really? Oh, I had no idea. I think it would have been a very different thing.
Well, there's no way you stay there and not know that while you're staying there.
Now there's no way. Now
they tell you on like every plaque around the building.
Oh man,
okay.
It's intense now.
But anyways, I do think that there was something supernatural about that house and that room. And I do think what you're saying is also true. I just think that staying in that room like exacerbated her mental state that is already fragile.
Okay.
That's my take on it.
Okay.
So, I mean, we can just agree to disagree.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we argued about it for like, I don't know, an hour, 2 hours last night. So
we did not.
It felt that long. So
no, we were talking about nostalgia.
Oh, well, that's the other. Well, that's a whole other topic. Yeah.
Yeah, because you were saying that
this movie's anti-nostalgia.
Yes.
It's anti-nostalgia, and I find it very refreshing because we're living in an era right now where nostalgia is intense, and I get it. We're in a pandemic right now. Things are not working out the way people want them to. To put it mildly, it's been a very tough couple of years. It was like that before the pandemic, but things are really hard right now. And when things get really bad, we do tend to look backwards. And this can be a way of reflecting on what you're grateful for, the people who you're grateful for, the experiences you've had that are great. But let's face it, in pop culture in particular, we're very intense about nostalgia. It's like the biggest hit that we go for. I mean, more than anything. I mean, even more than escapism, I feel like nostalgia is what people want, especially from movies. I mean, in the last couple of years, we've had remakes and sequels and prequels to Candyman and Ghostbusters and so on and so forth, James Bond. And a lot of that's great, but I do feel like nostalgia can be something you wrap yourself in like a blanket, and as a way of comfort is one thing, but it can be an obsession. And this movie is about the dangers of that, not looking back on the past in a way that's realistic and honest. As I told you, I went on a date with this girl when we saw, I think it was The Age of Innocence, I think. I think it was,
this
yeah, I'll tell
story?
that story. Why not? It was we went to see this costume drama, and everyone's wearing petticoats and, horse and carriage, and, the street lamps are lit by fire, and everything is naturally candlelit, and it was this really dull costume drama. I love these kinds of movies, but I did not like this particular one. So the date wasn't going all that great anyway, but we're driving home and she's like, oh, I wish I could live back in that time. And because I think on some unconscious level, I wanted to sabotage the date. What I said to her is, back in that era, they didn't really like have like tampons, like, women who it was their time of month, they had to use rags. And I don't think she said anything to me for the rest of the night and for the rest of life.
She's telling this story like even now, and it's going very differently.
You're not gonna believe what this jerk did to me. But I've said this too. Like, when you hear people nostalgic for the 50s, it's like, what exactly are you nostalgic for? Are you nostalgic for the cars, for the look of Greece? Are you nostalgic?
The 5-cent soda.
Sure. But then, again, like there used to be restaurants that had, plaques above the door that said, whites only. And it's like, be careful what you're nostalgic for, I guess is what I'm saying. And I think the film is saying that too.
Yeah.
Because there is ugliness in the past. There are awful things in the past. Right now, this is something else we covered last night. Everyone's obsessed with the 80s right now. And I do kind of blame Stranger Things. But even before that, people are obsessed with the 1980s. And look, like I was a child of the 80s. I have a lot of great memories of the 80s. I do. But, the list is long. HIV, Lockerbie, Challenger. I mean, there were so many awful things that happened in the 80s, awful things about the 80s.
And my argument was like, you're looking at it on a macro level. When people get nostalgic, they're usually looking at it from their own personal life. They're nostalgic for the music that they would listen to, or a bedroom where they'd play those records. They, going to a baseball game with their family, or I don't know. Yeah, driving in a specific car with their dad on an afternoon, and it just like meant a lot to them. So I was arguing that nostalgia is more personal than that. Because yeah, if you just look at it, I said, so is every era terrible? And you said yes. Which is true, okay?
Forgive me. Saying every era is just terrible. That's a blanket statement, and obviously, that speaks more to my cynicism than anything. But no, obviously, there's great things that happen, especially with art. But the thing is, art can be a mirror, but art can also lie. And I think, like in a lot of cases, people, an obvious example. I had a child. My friends in my childhood. A lot of the times, it felt like The Goonies. But it wasn't the Goonies,
Mm-hmm.
And I think the movie is speaking to that as well, because on the one hand, Eloise is thrilled that she's going to go to the place where all these movies and music and fashion happened, and she's celebrating when it happened and that sort of thing. But she's also not looking at, this is a time when, much less so than today, women did not have enough of a voice.
Mm-hmm.
And the image of women was so much more primitive than it is now. And that's another thing I love about this movie. It's, if this movie is, I think it obviously is, a reflection of the Me Too movement, or just a reflection of, the post-Weinstein world that we live in, what it's saying is, we need to have a sense of empathy that's deeper than just acknowledging that these things happen. It's a sense of, because Miss Collins, again, it's like, it's an extreme case, because she's not only a victim of these awful men, she's also someone who lashed out on them, towards them in a vigilante sort of way. But at the same time, empathy and compassion are two elements that we absolutely need when we talk about survivors of sexual abuse and sexual trauma. And And that's something, when we talk about movies like Breakfast at Tiffany's or those mod 60s movies, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls or the original Casino Royale, women are just like handed around to men, and the men are like Neanderthals in those movies.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that people overlook and celebrate, especially with like the Casino Royale, especially a lot of the early Bond movies. And I love Sean Connery, but I mean, he is manhandling those Bond girls, and he is a total brute in those movies. But hey, it's James Bond. We celebrate that. We overlook those things. That is another case where art is lying. So I think this movie is making a really valuable point about women who are rape survivors and this environment where they're putting their hopes, their dreams, their trust, most pivotal, their trust in these men who are monsters. And in any situation, as I was saying last night, like, whether it's, a young woman getting off a bus in New York going, I'm going to make it on Broadway, or what we know still happens to this day where buses show up in Hollywood and young starry-eyed actors look at the Hollywood sign and go, I'm going to make it here. It's going to happen. And they find their trust, their talent is taken advantage of by people who prey on that. A lot of that, it happens because we have an idea, a romanticized version of what these things are, as opposed to the reality that London and Hollywood and New York will eat you alive. Absolutely eat you alive. And I've never been to London, but I've been to Hollywood and New York. I kind of love both of them, especially New York. But at the same time, they are edgy, dangerous towns with very sinister pasts and, very, dark, scratchy elements to them. So I feel like, there could have been a version of this movie that is just about basking in the nostalgia, basking in the music. And in a sense, this movie starts as that, and it becomes, to live in this reality is to be bitten by it.
Yeah, we have to deal with the reality of what actually was going on.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Okay, so would you change anything about this film?
Yeah, I would love to have not a deleted scene, but a deleted moment where John, when he's checking on Eloise and she's inside being poisoned, and he knocks on the door, and who happens to be there next to him? She's like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" It's Jocasta. And Jocasta's going, "Oh my God, what's going on upstairs?" So she runs upstairs, and so everything happens as we see it. But sitting next to Sadie. Sandy, burning in the inferno is Jocasta. I want her. I want her to be punished for her crimes as cinema's worst roommate ever.
Wow,
ever.
that's almost as dark as this movie.
Well, Edgar Wright, I'm sorry, but that was a missed opportunity. You needed to punish that character.
Yeah.
Because she is awful.
She needed to have a little bit more of there should have been more of a comeuppance between her and Ellie.
You know what? I mean, there's a tragedy to that character too. Obviously, this is someone who is woefully, painfully insecure, and obviously not as talented as her roommate, who she proceeded to mock and belittle. But yeah, I hated her guts. For me, she's the real villain of the film because she's the embodiment of everything that's awful about London. Yeah, I don't know how this movie's going to do for the London Tourism Board, because on the one hand, it is visually beautiful and opulent, and you see the character, and you see the richness, and you see the history, but it's also about...
I think London will be fine.
Yeah, if anything, I don't think this movie is going to be the thing that takes London down.
No.
Yeah.
No. Okay, so you gave it 4 stars?
I did. Yeah, I think it's an excellent film. I do.
Yeah.
I can't think of a thing I don't like about it. I got to see it on the big screen, and it's a rich experience. The scene where Eloise first finds herself in the 1960s, and there's a big marquee of James Bond's Thunderball, and the music is blasting, and she's in the middle of the street. One of the best experiences I ever had in a movie theater last year was seeing that moment. Like, wow, this is incredible. It's a real big screen experience. And when the movie turns on the audience, it's even more like, oh, this is such an aggressively disturbing film. But yeah, it's a fantastic story. And when I say this, and people say like, oh, come on. It's his best film, really? Better than Shaun of the Dead? Better than Hot Fuzz? Better than Baby Driver? Yes, this is Edgar Wright's masterpiece. Easy, hands down. This is a world of difference from what he's done so far, and he's made wonderful movies. But there's a maturity, there's a complexity, there's a layer to this film that surpasses everything he's done so far. And I love a lot of his early movies, but I do think if he keeps on this track, I think he's going to be one of those filmmakers we speak about when we talk about the important filmmakers of the 20th. What century we're in? 21st. The 21st century. See, I'm stuck in the 60s.
Where are we?
Completely lost. Where would you go if you can go to bed and wake up? Where would you go?
Where would I
would
go?
want. Here's what because I thought about it today. I would wake up and be like, oh my God, I'm James Vanderbeek, and it's the late '90s. That's where I want. I'm wanted on the set of Dawson's Creek. I have adoring fans. I got to show up on the set of Varsity Blues, and I look like James Vanderbeek. That is the world I would want to wake up to every night.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
Yeah, I've thought about that today. Like, oh yeah, man, to be Vanderbeek. In the 90s, in the late 90s. Oh, man. That's better than being Elvis.
I think I'd want to go, okay, because I remember the 90s, so I think I'd want to do something, sorry to be like that failed date that you went on, but I think I would want to go back to like
the Jane Austen time?
No, like go to Scotland or something and experience like a different culture.
And you could like be in Scotland Yard and you could help like find Jack the Ripper?
No, I'd be like in the Highlands.
Oh, no. So this is your Outlander fantasy.
Yeah, total Outlander fantasy.
Or it's like Highlander the series and you're just trying to find...
Ooh, Highlander, yes.
You're trying to find, what's his name?
Adrian
Paul. You're the one who remembers his name. Adrian Paul.
There can be only one.
I'm sure he's a very nice guy, but yeah, Adrian Paul, you are
cheesy.
The head of his fan club right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you'd go to Scotland. When in Scotland would you go?
Oh,
Well, they were filming Highlander the series in the 90s. So meanwhile, I'm James Vanderbeek on the set of Varsity Blues, and you're like...
No, like I want to actually go to like the past when there were like Highlanders and stuff.
Why Scotland? I mean, you're Irish. Wouldn't you want to go to... Wouldn't you want to go to the motherland?
I don't know.
No?
Scotland seems more like manly, you know? Like,
oh, the Irish people listening to this right now are so angry.
That's true. That's rude.
What are you saying about manly? I'm manly. I'll punch you in the face. I'll show you manly. How dare you?
I don't know. There's just, I don't know. I think that would just be cool to see all that.
Interesting. So by all that, you mean...
Like the clans, like...
So you mean Braveheart? You mean William Wallace?
Braveheart.
Okay.
Yeah, like that.
Where men are getting slaughtered and decapitated. And
yeah, I mean,
they're fighting in kilts.
Okay, I do want to see Ireland, but I mean, I don't have like a visual of.
They don't have bagpipes over there.
They don't.
No.
There's been a lot of good movies about
Scotland
and the Highlands and all of that. So I think that would.
So I married an axe murderer.
Okay.
For one.
There you go.
One of the great films about the Scottish people.
This is just going downhill fast. But yeah, I think that'd be cool.
How many stars would you give Last Night in
I'd
Soho?
give it 4.
4? Really?
Yeah.
You liked it that much?
Yeah.
I didn't think you did.
Yeah.
You really did.
I would see it again like you to kind of put more of the pieces together and kind of follow it. That's the thing about movies like this is when you don't know anything about it, you're just like along for the ride, which is fun, and you're trying to piece it together. But I'd want to see if there were other clues that I missed.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, I certainly had that experience last night. And so, yeah, if you see it again.
Yeah. I mean, not too soon because it is disturbing, but I would see it again.
Yeah, I mean, you know.
I'd rather watch this than Mulholland Drive again.
There's a little Mulholland Drive in it. There's a little of Suspiria, a little bit of Polanski's The Tenant, Persona, Black Swan, a lot of those things. And one of the things I love about these movies is they're films about women. The Tenant less so, but like they're films about women who it's playing on this, you know, like it's like on one level it's about women who are in these extremely competitive situations, and they're artists and they're fighting for their place as artists. Black Swan obviously applies to this, so does Mulholland Drive, but it's also about how the environment gives off this, you know, this extremely harmful and hurtful spirit, so to speak. I do love that sort of idea. because I mean, there's too many movies about, you know, men who are hyper masculine, living these hyper masculine worlds, blah 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 blah. It's interesting. I think supernatural thrillers are more interesting, frankly, when women are the lead. And I don't know if I could properly explain why, but maybe just because I can think of offhand so many movies where I love I love psychological thrillers or supernatural thrillers where the lead is a woman, and the main characters are women. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we hope that you guys go out and see it if you haven't already.
Yeah, because by the way,
us talking about it does not do any justice to the art direction, the sets, the music, everything about this movie that is really amazing.
If you said you saw it in the theater, you're a liar. Nobody saw it. I saw it in the theater. A couple friends of mine saw it. No one saw this thing in the theater. And it's a crying shame because it was one of the great movie experiences
Hopefully
of last year.
you have a 50-inch TV and it's like the theater experience.
And just blast that soundtrack because this is a fantastic soundtrack.
Yeah.
Everything, it's a greatly cinematic experience. It's a great story. Thomas and Mackenzie, Anya Taylor-Joy, great performances. This is one of the best films of 2021, hands down. I wish it was a movie that people got to experience, but you know, going to a movie in a pandemic, unless it's like an event film or Spider-Man or Godzilla versus Kong, people didn't do it a lot last year. And hopefully this is a movie that people will discover over the years and embrace because it's special. It is Edgar Wright's best film, and it's a great movie.
All right. Well, that concludes our discussion of Last Night in Soho.
Good night, everyone.